This is Andrew Stotz, and I'm back with Uncovered Asia, where I explore companies that have not been covered by analysts and look interesting. So here we look at a company in China called SIHUAN Pharmaceutical Holdings, and they're focused on treatments for stroke, dementia, and epilepsy. So let's see the background of this company. It's a pharmaceutical biotech company listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and it focuses on R&D, manufacturing, and sales of innovative and generic drugs in China. So it's a Chinese company listed in Hong Kong. So the core treatment areas are what's called CCV, cardiocerebral vascular diseases, infectious diseases, oncology, digestive diseases, and metabolism health. So this means, for these CCV, it means treatment for stroke and also treatments for dementia. And anti-infective drugs means antibiotics for bacterial infections, treatments for infectious diseases like Ebola, and they appear to be going through clinical trials for COVID-19. Now remember, this is not a recommendation, it's research. I'm looking at the company. So, oncology, well, they look at all the different major types of cancer and create drugs for those. And then metabolism, they have an injection to treat niacin and B-complex vitamin deficiency and supports metabolism issues. So the company is dominant in CCV drugs, about 81%. And here is a recent share price, which got me interested as I was seeing it starting to move. And you can get a picture. Now, the volatility is quite high. You can see the volatility for this stock over the last 3 months has been 55%, and the maximum drawdown over the last 12 months has been about 50%. So this has a lot of volatility, but believe it or not, its beta is still low. So let's look at the FVMR scorecard that I use, and here we can see I rank fundamentals, valuation, momentum, and risk relative to 2,680 non-financial companies in China. And here what I can see is that on a scale from 1 to 10, with worst on the left and B means best on the right, the fundamentals, average, stagnant margins, but a little bit above average, in fact. And valuation, well, it's pretty undervalued. And that's part of where I think the research would start. Why is it undervalued? What has the company done? What has the company said? Let's see momentum. Well, profit momentum is very weak. Now remember, everybody's suffering during this COVID time, but what's interesting about this is that I'm looking at this relative to the peers in China. So if it's worse here, it means that, in fact, the operating profits have been struggling. And you can see the recurring EPS has gone down by 24.8. So again, this is not a recommendation. It's really a starting point to say, okay, that recurring EPS I'd like to know more about. And you can see the price change has been positive. And finally, the risk. And the risk rates relatively well relative to 2,680 non-financial companies in China, mainly because current ratio is strong. Net debt to equity is actually net cash, the company's net cash, and the beta is low. So, finally, let's look at my world-class benchmarking scorecard that helps me understand the ranking of this company's financial performance relative to peers. So, I'm looking at this company and I'm benchmarking it against 400 medium-sized healthcare companies worldwide. And what we can see is I look at profitable growth, a combination of profitability and growth. And from this, we can see that profitable growth has gone from 2 to 3 to 4. That's a fall. 5 is about average, and number 1 or number 2 we would consider to be world-class. So this is above average. That's good, but it has been falling. Now if we look at profitability, we can see it's in the top 30%, so it's ranked a 3. But this is above average compared to peers. But what we can see is that growth has deteriorated in the past 12 months. So what is growth? Growth is EPS growth. Let's move on to see asset efficiency is very, very low. So that is an area of improvement for this company. And expense controlled has ranked number 1. So they got that down. So really it's a matter of getting revenue up, because that's been pretty weak at number 8, and getting the margin direction from falling. Now, the margin direction shows how the margin has moved over the past 12 months relative to global peers. We can see that it's fallen by 10, so that means it's in the 10th decile. It means it's very weak. But you can also see that the actual margin, which is expense control, the actual margin actually is very strong. So yes, it's deteriorating, but not to a destructive level. So let's just check in on some recent news I was looking at. So since March 2020, SIHUAN Pharmaceuticals pursued a second indication with the favipiravir, which is their Ebola treatment, seeing if it could work for COVID. So that's what they're in the process of, and apparently clinical trials are underway, and we're awaiting data. So the question is, what do you think about this company? It's focused on treatments for stroke, dementia, and epilepsy. Finally, let me remind you, this is not a recommendation. This is a starting point for research.